On this Tuesday night, election déjà vu. Pretty much a political status quo as the Liberals failed to win the majority they were seeking.
This was the most pointless election in Canada's history.
What the Liberals gained and lost, plus what the outcome means for the future of the leaders and the country. And some reflections on why voting is vital, even if it doesn't result in much change. The Jason Kenney effect on the federal Conservatives.
I think it played a significant role.
How a Tory Blue Alberta voted this time as its unpopular premier shuffles his cabinet.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It is all over. None of the parties got what they wanted, and now Canadians are left wondering whether the federal election changes anything in the months ahead. Though some races are still too close to call, it is clear Justin Trudeau's Liberals did win enough seats to form a second minority government. The seat count is almost identical to last time. This is 2019, and this is 2021. Some ballots still need to be counted, but the numbers and the makeup of Parliament is almost exactly what it was before. Yet Justin Trudeau calls it a clear mandate.
Some have talked about division, but that's not what I see. You are sending us back to work with a clear mandate to get Canada through this pandemic and to the brighter days ahead.
That was last night. Today, Trudeau was out thanking voters in his riding. He didn't hold any media briefing, though. Conservative Erin O'Toole did answer questions today. He admitted he is disappointed the Tories didn't make more gains, but says he is ready for next time.
I'm the leader of the party that founded this great country, and I'm very proud of that. I want to earn that trust of Canadians, and that's why we're going to work tirelessly to examine what went right, what went wrong.
The NDP's Jagmeet Singh also failed to win as many seats as he'd hoped, but will return to Ottawa holding the balance of power and in a position of influence.
We were the most successful opposition party in the last parliament, and this parliament looks pretty much the same. And we'll continue to do the work that we did before, so Canadians can rest assured we'll be there for them.
Saskatchewan's premier today spoke about the election and voiced what a lot of Canadians are probably feeling.
This was the most pointless election in Canada's history. The Prime Minister spent over $600 million of your dollars, taxpayer dollars, and 5 weeks further dividing the country to arrive at almost the same result that we had 2 months ago in the House of Commons.
Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson watched this all play out with us last night. Mercedes, Justin Trudeau framing this result as a clear mandate for the future. Does anyone outside of his inner circle believe that?
I don't think that Canadians are buying that, and they clearly sent that message in the polls. They said, yes, we're giving you a mandate to govern, but it's the same election result, essentially, as we saw in 2019. Canadians are comfortable with the Liberals leading, and they want them to do that, but they want the checks and balances of other parties in place. This was a $600 million election, essentially for a couple of seats, and very divisive rhetoric on the campaign trail for essentially the same result. What the Liberals are trying to spin this as is saying they needed the moral authority to govern with big picture programs, things like $10 a day childcare, a bold environmental plan, and COVID recovery. But the reality is all of those programs were actually introduced in the last parliament. They had the NDP on side. In fact, if anything, the NDP wanted them to go further. So trying to argue they needed to go to the polls so they could do these things, I'm not sure that people are going to buy into that. And they're in the same situation now with Parliament. They have to work with other parties. One senior Liberal said to me, well, you know, we're in a more secure situation, though, now, because no one's going to want another election. Well, I think it's a little hard to argue anyone other than Justin Trudeau and the Liberals wanted this election.
No party got what they wanted last night. What might this mean for the future of Justin Trudeau, of Erin Otoole and Jagmeet Singh?
Well, for Justin Trudeau, you know, he's very popular in the Liberal Party, but this was the first election where we saw his personal brand actually becoming problematic in polling, that people felt that this was an election he called about him because he wanted power. They saw it as a power grab. So he went from being the golden boy of the Liberal Party to a potential risk. Will he run in another election? One senior Liberal said to me, who knows, people's circumstances change. That's not something you would have heard after a previous election. Erin Otoole, though, much more difficult road ahead. There's going to be a huge fight inside the party about whether it was a mistake to move towards the centre and they should have gone and stayed where they were on the right with the PPC vote. Jagmeet Singh underperformed in terms of the number of seats that he won. However, he will be in a power position in Parliament, and that may help to protect him, Donna.
All right. Lots to watch for. Mercedes Stephenson, thank you. The challenge for the Liberals is to make Parliament work with the help of the other parties and actually deliver on the promises they made. They did make gains in Alberta. That might help build some bridges there. Here's Abigail Bimman.
Let us feel the warmth of a new dawn.
A new dawn? Or Groundhog Day?
We're right back where we started. We got the same results. Although it was a draw on the federal treasury of $610 million and meant a lot of us had to wait in line to vote.
Your worst day in governing is better than your best day in opposition. So yeah, this is a win, absolutely. Maybe not the full win that they wanted, but it is a win.
I hear you when you say that you just want to get back to the things you love, not worry about this pandemic or about an election.
After railing against the opposition for getting in the way during the last minority government, how exactly will the Liberals move forward with another minority mandate?
This is the way it is in politics, and the Prime Minister is going to make his best case that this is indeed what he wanted to happen after all. But he's going to have to deal with some opposition parties, and he's got to prove to Canadians that he can make Parliament work.
The biggest losses for Liberals look like 3 cabinet ministers down. In Ontario, Minister for Women, Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development Mariam Monsef and Seniors Minister Deb Schultz. And in Nova Scotia, Fisheries Minister Bernadette Jordan.
Having 3 women cabinet ministers lose is particularly not very good.
The Liberals had some interesting pickups too. A GTA seat stolen back from floor crosser Leona Alislev, and looks like 2 seats in Alberta where they had been shut out completely in 2019. Pundits and partisans will argue about winners and losers and which heads should roll or stay attached. For the moment, let's give the last word to the Trudeau matriarch.
Well, I'm so proud of him. He kept the high road. He kept being kind.
Perhaps save for this moment.
Isn't there a hospital you should be going to bother right now?
Broadly speaking, Trudeau did not engage in personal attacks in an election many will see as a personal referendum on his leadership. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
The governing Liberals will need the support of the NDP to get some things done, like passing a budget. Jagmeet Singh didn't win as many seats as he wanted, but he will still wield some power getting his agenda on the table. Here's Gill.
Donna, Jagmeet Singh looked dejected and disappointed when he held his post-mortem news conference. The party will obviously have to dissect what went wrong, but Singh insists he'll stay at the helm of the NDP. Jagmeet Singh is carrying the weight of a party that wanted to send more New Democrats to Ottawa.
It's a loss not just for me as a leader and not just for New Democrats as a team, but it's a loss for Canada, some of these really incredible candidates that would have really made a big difference.
This is the second election for Singh, and despite his personal popularity, it hasn't translated into votes for the NDP. Party insiders say it takes time to build up a leader.
And if Canadians overwhelmingly have a positive impression of Mr. Singh, then that's a good thing. That's where you start. And then it's the next phase, which is to look at somebody and see them, yeah, this could be our Prime Minister.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much.
The NDP spent $25 million on this campaign.
Yo, bro, who got you smiling like that?
Much of it on a social media strategy aimed at a younger electorate that didn't turn out as hoped. This political scientist says the NDP leader was all style and no substance.
Tell me what the content was in the NDP platform this time. A lot about his mum, a lot about I'm not the other guys, and then a bunch of promises that no one could take seriously.
Singh spoke to Justin Trudeau to congratulate him, but says there wasn't an opportunity to negotiate his priorities, which include a national pharmacare and dental plan. He still believes that he's in a position to fight for those issues, despite being a fourth-place party when the opportunity comes. Donna?
All right, Gill in Vancouver, thanks. Erin Otoole also failed to deliver what he was going for. He lost, and the Conservatives have fewer seats now than they did in the last election. He leads a divided party politically and geographically. O'Toole said today he wants to learn from what happened last night. Here's Couture.
With his family in tow, Erin Otoole returned to Ottawa with nearly the same number of MPs and nearly the same questions the last leader faced in 2019. How can he consider this a win, and how can he stay on as Conservative Party leader?
We also didn't win the trust to a level we needed in parts of the GTA, some parts of the country that we have to do better. That's why we're going to undertake a review to make sure we learn the lessons.
At last count, the O'Toole Conservatives won fewer seats than in 2019. 1/3 of elected Conservatives are from Saskatchewan and Alberta, a place where support was down from the last election.
We can expect those MPs to take issue with the kind of campaign that he ran, which is, trying to move the party to the centre, make it look much more like an old progressive Conservative party.
Still, some in the party say that move to the middle is essential if the Conservatives want to form government again.
When you sacrifice votes in the West to gain more votes in the East, and at the end of the day, we're in a situation where, we might have to do that.
The Conservative Party constitution stipulates a leadership review is triggered if they don't form government after an election. Andrew Scheer was pressured to step aside, but some feel O'Toole shouldn't suffer that same fate.
When you lose a couple in a row, people get restless. The question, again, I ask myself is we've got so much invested in Mr. O'Toole in a minority parliament, probably best to let him have another crack at this.
If you think O'Toole's comments and commitment to a review process sound familiar, it's because they are. Andrew Scheer said the same things in 2019 and was forced to step down 2 months later. Donna?
All right, Michael Couture, thanks. The Green Party's future looks precarious. Leader Anna Paul failed to win her Toronto riding, putting her political future in doubt. The party also got a lower percentage of the popular vote this time. But as Mike Drolet reports, the Greens are still sending 2 MPs to Ottawa and scored their first election win in Ontario.
There's no asterisk in politics. You either win or lose. In the end, it doesn't matter how you got there.
You can call it a lucky break or whatever, but it worked out.
Newly elected Green Party MP Mike Morris's road to electoral victory opened up when Liberal incumbent Raj Saini dropped out of the race amid accusations of inappropriate behavior towards his female staff, which he denied.
Yeah, I'm not concerned with any asterisks. I'm doing this to be a voice for my neighbors in Ottawa.
Morris, along with Elizabeth May, are the only Greens going to Ottawa after a turmoil-filled election.
This wasn't a good night for the Greens, and it wasn't a good night for Anna Paul.
Where to start? How about with the internal squabbles that consumed the party for the better part of the year? At the center of it, party leader Anna Paul, who finished a distant 4th, not nationally. She finished 4th in her Toronto Centre riding.
It is hard to lose. No one likes to lose.
Under Paul, the party failed to field a candidate in 86 ridings and didn't release its core platform on climate until 2 weeks ago.
There's a lot to analyze. I wouldn't want to just give an off-the-cuff answer, but I'm not surprised because we usually are much better organized in advance and really have a strong efforts to engage.
That could be seen as a swipe at Paul, who only campaigned outside her riding 4 times during the election. Now her party of 2 is facing a leadership review.
I think it's too early to say that the Greens have no future, but I think they're going to have some tough conversations about, what that future is going to look like and what they're going to do better next time.
And whether there'll be a next time for Anna Paul. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
The cracks in Conservative support coming up. Was Alberta's unpopular premier a liability for Erin Otoole? Alberta is in a state of turmoil. Not only has Premier Jason Kenney shuffled his health minister out of that role, he's asked for the federal government to help manage the record number of COVID-19 patients and the shortage of critical care staff. Premier Kenney is deeply unpopular in Alberta. How he handled the crisis played out in the final days of the federal election campaign, and it may have affected the Tory vote. In 2019, the federal Conservatives received 69% of the popular vote in Alberta. This time that dropped to 55%. And the COVID crisis isn't over. Alberta has more than 20,000 active cases and almost 1,000 people in the hospital. As Jamie Dahl reports, some in Kenney's own cabinet want him out.
Alberta is sending a Liberal to Ottawa, and he's from Calgary, splintering the solid blue canvas once sprawling over the heartland of Conservative country.
We got to put partisanship to the side and focus on delivering for our city and province.
The Tories' grip easing some in Edmonton, with 2 New Democrats heading to Ottawa. While the bulk of Alberta MPs are still CPC, support is starting to sag. Some wasting no time pointing the finger of blame squarely at the Premier and his handling of the pandemic.
I think it played a significant role. I don't know how you can look at a federal Conservative campaign that increased its popular vote, that picked up seats outside of Alberta and lost seats within Alberta, without looking at the effect that the Premier had and the connection between the O'Toole team and the provincial government.
Erin Otoole refused to even mention Jason Kenney by name during his campaign. The Premier's popularity has plummeted, and there are even calls for a leadership review from members in his own party as the province battles another deadly fourth wave.
I believe that the leadership in this province has been wanting. It's been all over the map and inconsistent. It's clear that Albertans and party members cannot trust him.
On Tuesday afternoon, Kenney decided to shake things up, swapping out his health minister. The timing, no coincidence, but this political analyst says the federal election results are not why.
Having stuck with the health minister for this long and only replacing him on the eve of a caucus meeting that is rumored to have a non-confidence motion at it really does suggest that the Premier is throwing Minister Shandro under the bus in an attempt to save his own career.
There is another factor that could have weakened Tory support in Alberta. While they didn't win a seat, the People's Party of Canada got a little over 7% of the popular vote here. Further proof of a shift in a province often reluctant to change. Jamie Dahl, Global News, Edmonton.
Ahead, how Monday's vote paints another clear picture of Canada's stark divisions. The outcome of the federal election exposed a sharp divide in this country. Prime Minister Trudeau's political gamble didn't get him the majority he wanted and was an unpopular move among many Canadians. The outcome appears to have changed little, but it did stoke anger. Here's Eric Sorensen.
Donna, this is what the House of Commons looked like at dissolution, and after yesterday's election, so far, it looked like this. You could be forgiven for not seeing much difference.
Mr. Trudeau was hoping for a quick power grab.
It wasn't the most gracious concession, but Erin O'Toole's reaction, fueled by that election outcome, underscores the divisions in the country.
Canadians sent him back with another minority at the cost of $600 million and deeper divisions in our great country.
Some have talked about division, but that's not what I see.
The Prime Minister was already trying to move on, but the campaign wounds and barbs are still fresh.
6 years of Mr. Trudeau.
Mr. O'Toole, you're wrong.
Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole teamed up. The divisions reflected in a campaign that was often uncivil. The divide is striking, often acrimonious, between Conservatives and Liberals, between East and West, you can see that on the map, and between urban and rural. Look at the makeup of the biggest cities. In Vancouver, mostly Liberal red, some NDP orange. Montreal, Laval, a perpetual Liberal stronghold. And Toronto and the surrounding communities, the so-called Liberal fortress, ever expanding. While larger rural ridings in blue and some large swaths of the country are just as solidly anchored to their Conservative roots. The frustration for Conservatives, there are more urban voters with progressive views on issues from climate to guns.
The Liberals have shown once again that they're able to appeal to the urban vote, but rural Canada very much still remains within the Conservative realm. That's a cleavage that I think all political parties are taking stock of right now.
I want to congratulate the Prime Minister on his re-election as Prime Minister of Canada.
Thud is the way Jagmeet Singh's congratulations may have landed with his supporters, but it was civil and it's a start. Trudeau would like the ill will to go away now.
I hear you when you say that you just want to get back to the things you love, not worry about this pandemic or about an election.
He was the first to want this election, and seemingly the first who wants to put it behind him. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Next, some reflections on the right to vote. There is a shared sentiment today that this country just went to the polls for nothing. Candidates campaigned during a pandemic, and Canadians ended up with virtually the same political representation we had before. It is understandable that people are miffed, but voting is a right we shouldn't take for granted. Mike Armstrong gives us some context.
There was a time when we couldn't do this. Well, people like me could. White, landowning men really haven't had much trouble voting through history. But the lineups at polling stations would have looked very different if you went back through time. Before 1960, First Nations couldn't vote without giving up their Indian status. Before 1950, the Inuit couldn't vote. Asian Canadians didn't get the right to vote until 1948. And if you went back to 1917, basically half of the entire country, women, couldn't vote. So back to today. It's a right that's easy to take for granted, and a lot of us do. Votes are still being counted, so the final voter turnout still isn't known, but it's not good. It may be just under 60%, which would make it the worst voter turnout in a federal election ever. During this election, the world watched an entire country lose the right to vote. Women or men, there will be no visits to a ballot box in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future. No more fingers dyed to show they'd just cast a vote and had literally put their lives on the line showing up to do it. Well, they wish they had our problems.
Done in Afghanistan.
Elections aren't easy, they're bitter, and they're not cheap. At $600 million, they're really not cheap. But we might want to avoid saying they don't have any value, even one where it feels like no one got what they wanted. It's kind of fun and it feels accurate to shrug our shoulders and say, all that for this? Well, maybe we're pretty much the same country we were in 2019. Maybe most of us still feel pretty much the same way and support the same people we did then. It feels like we've got the proof. So maybe we should try not to take that expression of the will of the people for granted. And considering the brutal year and a half we've all just had, the fact we're not more divided may be a good sign. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that's Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.